catching up to iNaturalist out here on the porch. We've got the rest of the afternoon off. We've got a computer about to die, so I'm trying to do that pretty quickly. But I'm multiple days behind, so I try to do what I can here. Phone's about to die too, so I'm trying to make this intro pretty quick. But I just wanted to follow up. After last time, we started looking at filters, and we were looking at how to find observations by date using the map. I had one more thought on the dates that I'll show you toward the end of this video, but I think where we'll go a step further will be to look at some of the symbology that iNaturalist uses, why the different colors of the dots on the map matter. Again, that might add a little bit more meaning to it when you're kind of scrolling around looking at, at different observations made across the landscape. Also, the different shapes of those features that are used, why some of them are pinpoints and why some of them are the bigger kind of vague round circles. And to kind of clue you in on that, you'll have some observations that are actually precise and others that are obscured a bit. And so I'll show you the difference between the two and think about maybe why some observations would be obscured. It could be a good thing. Let's see, we'll look at an example of kind of how I use iNaturalist kind of outside its intended purpose, but thinking about a scenario where we're trying to replace some invasive shrubs with new species, and I use iNaturalist as sort of a jumping off point for comparing different species, reading up on them, seeing what their distributions are, right? So horticulturally, where different species actually tend to do well. Sometimes you're surprised by that. And so looking at a field guide versus looking at iNaturalist, you're actually seeing not just theoretically where plants should be, but where they actually have established in different places. And so that's kind of cool, but we'll also bump up against the limitations of that as well and see where we can learn a little bit, but certainly extending out your research to a Google search and all the different possible resources. iNaturalist is not going to be a one-stop shop for everything you might do for a yard project or habitat management, but it can kind of get you started, and it's a somewhat familiar interface for me anyway, where I kind of know what to expect, and it kind of gives me some sort of point of comparison. So we'll look at those today. Let's get into it. I still have some things on my mind, things I noticed as we were looking at iNaturalist filters last time and maps that I didn't really have time to talk about for that little segment. And so I'm taking the opportunity now while the neighbor's AC is not running to talk to you. It's 72 degrees. It's a beautiful morning. I'm not really sure why we're trying to numb ourselves to that, but maybe later when it's like 90, then I'll get it. But it's gonna be a long summer for somebody. Anyway, rather than spending my time ranting, let's look at the map again. So this was the North America map. I want to zoom in for a minute just so we can see a little bit better. And so it happens to be I'm kind of zooming in on that rough range from the mid-Atlantic out to the Great Plains that we were looking at before. I'm going to go ahead, redo the search in the map. Remember, that's just going to take it down to this rectangle here. And so it still is pretty overwhelmed at this distance, but the closer that I get, assuming it keeps reloading for me, I'm going to focus on Indiana because I'm a homer. Getting closer, getting closer. Okay, did you notice that change? So we went from all orange, sort of splotches, to now we're looking at a number of different colors. And so there are all these sort of symbologies that I overlooked a bit as we were looking at our maps before, but now I want to take a minute just to sort of elucidate some of that. So you've got these various colors and actually some varied shapes. Yeah, I can still see some in here. So looking just in this area here, I'll redo the search in the map just so it's not overwhelmed with the amount of information we're looking at. As we get closer, so we've got these pinpoints throughout the city. This is in Indianapolis. And then zooming back out, you see there are some faded circles as well. Okay, and so first of all, the difference in shape, the pinpoints are going to be accurate as far as
geography goes. So wherever it happens to be sitting is where the observation was made. And so that's pretty literal. You can kind of run with that. But the circles, let's see, back out. If it'll let me click on some. The circles, so here's a red-shouldered hawk. And so this picture was taken, but for whatever reason, this isn't actually where it was seen. Okay, and so there are some good reasons to do that potentially. And I can show you with future uploads how you might obscure a location. You might do that because you're somewhere that other people shouldn't be, right? So it could be like your private property that you don't want somebody, if you found something really cool, some sort of trillium, you don't want people coming out looking for that. You found a morel mushroom or something, you might have somebody get kind of worked up and try to go find it. But at any rate, it's not necessarily clear because red-shouldered hawk, let's see, actually it is clear, you know what? So here's your symbol here. So it's considered vulnerable in Indiana. So that didn't cross my mind because it's a bit more abundant in Texas, but being a vulnerable species in Indiana, iNaturalist is automatically going to obscure its location. And so you see over here, and these other faint dots on the map are other red-shouldered hawks that have been seen in the area, but it's not going to be precise. Point being, you don't want people, even well-intending people, to be going looking for these animals specifically and potentially harassing individuals that might be on their mating grounds, might be trying to defend a nest, and putting a bunch of stress on them that is completely undue and might end up actually having really serious ramifications. Okay, so kind of an interesting example there. Let's see, going back, exploring again. I'm going to work my way back close again. Let's see, back to Indiana. Can't help myself. Let's see, there's Indianapolis. Okay, so redoing search in the map. So there are pinpoints and then there are obscured locations. So you either obscure it because you want to, or otherwise because iNaturalist is trying to help protect a vulnerable species. And then these colors, green's gonna, I think obviously, be for plants. So any green will be a plant. If it'll let me select one for you. There you go, there's the silver maple. We've got other colors here too. And so red will be insects. So Katie did there. Blue will be other animals. All right, so think like vertebrates. So there's a robin. It's like birds and mammals, especially will both be that way. Reptiles, and then you don't see these as much, but the pinkish purple, that's a fungus, right? So the scaly ink cap is going to be a fungus. I think protists come up that way too, but I wouldn't hold me to that, and I don't know how likely we are just from taking a shot in the dark to actually find a protist on the map. But that just kind of gives you some sense of the different colorations. Now, I want to look back. We saw the vulnerable species tag for the red-shouldered hawk, and then the black-capped chickadee that we looked at in the last video. Combining ideas there. The black-capped chickadee we looked at last time. I actually made for that to be my observation. Filtering, and I could have gone to my observations first and then did that, and correction, it wasn't a black-capped chickadee, it was a Carolina chickadee. Remember using the sound to clarify the difference between the Carolina and black-capped. Anyway, so Carolina chickadee, I wanted to point out, so not only was it research grade in green, but also, rather than having the vulnerable tag here, the point is that it's endemic to the United States. Native and occurs nowhere else. That's what endemic means. And so, so that's kind of a cool distinction as well. Let's see, so looking back, here, I'll click on the chickadee and we'll kind of see what its map looks like. So you see I went through the species page by clicking on its name, and you see endemic to the United States. You're not finding it in Mexico or Canada, let alone on a different continent. Okay, cool. I wanted to bring up on a sort of specific example, specific point. My dad and I were talking about in his yard on a hillside, he's cleared a bunch of invasive Japanese honeysuckle, and so he wants to find another plant species to maybe occupy that space. And certainly, he's also just going to kind of see what's in the seed bank that has been crowded out maybe by that honeysuckle, and will come back. But we're talking about a genus, Weigela, which on this kind of cool pamphlet through the Midwest Invasive Plant Network is described as, without going into too much detail about the whole document here, it's cool. I would suggest trying to find it, but Weigela florida is listed as a potential replacement to kind of give you the same aesthetic as Japanese barberry, which is an invasive species. And so I thought, well, I can use iNaturalist. Maybe I mentioned to scout out locations. What if I could scout out some species this way too? And so we'll do a little comparison of the two and see what sort of tagging they get as well. So Weigela florida. Clicking on that, notice that just by searching up here and searching for a species, I'm looking at the observations. I'm in the Explore section just kind of automatically. And no, it's going to be sort of an enigma, I guess. There are not a lot of Weigela florida that have been observed. Only a couple are research grade. So it's a little bit of a mystery. But we can look at, see, by clicking on any one of these, we can first look at the observation itself. And I mentioned, so there was vulnerable for the red-shouldered hawk in Indiana specifically. There was endemic for the Carolina chickadee. Here we've got a tag introduced in the northeast and mid-Atlantic states and arrived in the region via an anthropogenic or human-caused means. And so it is, and actually looking back, was indicated here. I didn't go far into it, of course, but it is an exotic species. That's what the E is standing for. From the perspective of somebody in the Midwestern United States. And if we click on the name and go to its species page on iNaturalist, it is a pretty plant. And you see, so you've got some more observations in Europe and then also in Asia. And as far as information goes, these pages will usually draw on Wikipedia, but this is not the English version of Wikipedia. Right, so just really adding some more shrouded mystery to this species. So what I might do, I use iNaturalist kind of up to the point that I can, and it is going to be a little bit, limited in ways that I'm not necessarily using it for its intended purpose, but I am getting some interesting information out of it and from some context especially. But I can Google Weigela florida. And see more, I guess, horticulturally what it's about in the United States. And so you've got some information there. You've got a sense of its native range and how big it is, and some more pictures of it. I mean, the internet is vast. I just get as much as I can out of iNaturalist because I find it interesting and I enjoy using the interface. But there was Weigela florida. Remember how sparse that was? It was suggested as an alternative to Japanese barberry. And so I want to have a look at that. Let's see. So we only had a couple of research grade Weigela. I'm going to zoom in because the map doesn't necessarily want to load this time. Okay, hello. So Japanese barberry is very abundant and widely distributed. That doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. We can see even in this bounding box, I've got some of Europe over here. But Japanese barberry, where do you suppose it comes from? Okay, that's just been a reality with a lot of invasive plants in the United States, that a lot of them are coming from Asian communities, biological communities, where they had natural predators, natural competitors. They get here to the United States and they have different growing seasons. They just do particularly well. That is the story of virtually any invasive species of any kind. Is they find some sort of competitive advantage. And so for the Japanese barberry, they seem to have taken hold throughout the Midwest and Northeast in the United States. And again, not necessarily a bad thing, but if you were to look into it and really make some inferences, if it was something that was used in gardens and you start to see it a lot on roadsides or in woodlots that shouldn't have had anything planted in them, then that's going to be your indication. And so that happens with lots of species, like the honeysuckle that Dad was pulling out, like tree of heaven, like he's pulled out. All various different species, multiflora rose. There are lots of them there in the Midwest that folks are kind of fighting with, and so you can kind of infer that from the map. But at the very least, you have something that is relatively likely to invade. It's a good practice to try to find something that is less likely. And then, of course, best of all, the gold standard would be native. But realistically, it might be some combination of native and sort of naturalized species you look at. Let's look at the Japanese barberry for a minute. So again, it's going to get the same sort of designation, introduced through anthropogenic means. And so it doesn't really come out and say invasive, but it's meant to kind of cause a little bit of alarm when a species is not in its natural location. And then clicking on that, so we saw it's distributed a lot more widely, it's been discussed a lot more, and then the Wikipedia sort of carryover onto iNaturalist here says the same thing. So you've got the cultivation history, its role as an invasive species. Something I find extra unsettling is that it can create a favorable environment for ticks, so therefore Lyme's disease might be more associated with areas with more Japanese barberry. Might be pretty, but it packs a little bit of a punch, I guess. And so, really, I just kind of wanted to sort of redouble efforts there. I guess if there's one more thing with the minute I have left that I wanted to look at and I haven't yet, just kind of exploring again. I will zoom in on Indiana, just to remind you that you can just kind of pick out the typical geographic feature. Get in close enough where it's going to distinguish the different types of organisms. Okay, there we go. And then filtering. I didn't cover the months before, but the months transcend years. By that I mean if you click on January and February, this is all the January and February observations from all the years, right? So 2020 back through whatever the oldest winter observation was. And so that's kind of cool. You can look at specific months. You can look at specific seasons, right? Roughly based on these dates. And you're not limiting yourself to just 2020. All right? Have fun. Play around with it some more.
All right, so I hope that's helpful. I'm still working on iNaturalist. Hasn't quite died yet, but we're getting close. But I'm caught up with it in about 8 days. That could be better, but again, you do what you can. Anyway, I don't know exactly where we're going to go next time. That was just sort of finishing. Today was finishing a thought from before, but I think we're going to end up heading in some other different direction. And so there are various things I'm thinking about as I look and see what sorts of bugs and in our case we've had green anoles that are visiting the porch. Maybe we could do some observations from just in and around the house. I'm also thinking the sort of field observations that I'll sometimes make using my DSLR camera, using wildlife cameras. There are different ways we could go with that. There are other themes. I've got a lot of favorite observations that we could talk about. There's a lot of different ways we could go. Certainly I'll take any suggestions into account too. So if you have any ideas, leave a comment. Anyway, I don't trust this computer to last any longer. I've got a big batch of observations that would go next. I know that'll kill it. Don't trust the phone to last much longer. So I bid you adieu. I'm gonna go inside and see what my baby's doing.